Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to briefly define what is a negative power and look at a couple of examples, first with just numbers and then how to simplify expressions that also have variables. So first, let's just define a negative power. So whenever you have some number, we'll just say x, to a power negative n, and it could be 3, 4, any number, it really doesn't matter what it is. So definition is like this. So first of all, it is a mistake to think that that negative will just get pulled out and it'll be like negative x to the power positive n. That is not true. So the negative power right here is not responsible for taking it like out. What it's responsible is for computing what we call a reciprocal, which is 1 over. So instead of the negative power, it just disappears, but the x to the power n jumps to the bottom, right? So you can think about it like this, like x to the power negative n, you can divide it by 1 to make it like looks like a fraction. So now that's going to be like 1 over x to the power positive n. So basically, whenever you see a negative power, what you do is you move the expression to the bottom from the top and get rid of a minus. And by the way, vice versa, if you had something like this where you had an expression with a negative power and it was on the bottom, you can just move it to the top from the bottom and the negative is going to disappear. So that's a kind of interesting property of powers, and that's how we define negative powers. So let's go ahead and compute some of the expressions with just numbers and also verify them on a calculator. So something like 2 to the power negative 3, for example, I want to compute that. That is not negative 2 to the power 3. That is not correct. You cannot just pull that minus out of the power. What you do is you just make it 1 over, and then it's going to be 2 to the power 3. So not negative 3. Now it just becomes 3. So it's positive. And 1 over, well, 2 cubed, that would be 8. So the answer is 1 over 8. Now, just to quickly show you that that is correct, if I put on a calculator 2 to the power, and then I put negative 3, I press enter, that just tells me that there's 1 over 8. Okay, so if I, for example, want to compute 5 to the power negative 2, so we know that that's the same thing as 5 to the power 2, which is 25, but you do 1 over, so that'll become 1 over 25, right? So this is really easy, and you can just do this stuff on a calculator if you just have numbers. But what happens if you have variables? So let's just discuss the variable stuff. So for example, let's rewrite an expression so that it has no negative powers. So sometimes you will see that some of the exercises are going to ask you that. So for example, let's say somebody said, okay, well, I want to rewrite 1 divided by x cubed. I'm sorry. Uh, I already gave you the answer. X to the power negative 3. What is that? That is 1 over x cubed. So I wanted to ask you what it's going to be, but I gave you the answer. Okay, well, we can do another one. How about x to the power negative 1? Well, what that is 1 over x to the power positive 1. But power 1 is just the same thing as the number, so that's just going to be x. So x to the power negative 1 is 1 over x. So if I, for example, want to do something like x to the power negative 5, that's going to be 1 over x to the power positive 5, and so on. So sometimes what would happen is you would have a negative power on the bottom. So you would have something like 1 over x to the power negative 5. So what that does is, as I already told you about, it basically flips it to the top. So if you have a negative power, you can flip it to the bottom. So think of it as like over 1. And the negative goes away. This one, you flip it to the top. So it becomes x to the power positive 5. And then 1 will go on down, but 1 is you don't have to divide by 1, so that would be just x to the power 5. Okay, so sometimes you also have to use some rules of powers and then also rewrite it without a negative power. So let me give you another example. So let's say you have something like x to the power 4 divided by x to the power 6. So if we use a rule that says that whenever we have these like powers, right, and it's the same x or some number, but it has has to be the same, raised to two different powers, we just subtract them. So what we could do is go ahead and subtract 4 minus 6. Well, that's going to give us negative 2. But if you don't want negative powers, you have to rewrite it. So how do you rewrite it? That would be 1 over x squared. So by the way, this would be the same thing you can do without actually using negative powers. As I told you before, you just subtract the powers, but whichever one is larger, well, here 6 is larger, so the x squared will be on the bottom. Compare that if I had x to the 6 divided by x to the 4, that would be x to the power 2, right? Not 1 over x to the power 2. So it depends on whether the higher power is on the bottom or on the top. Okay, so a similar example would be something like, let's say I want to simplify x to the power 7 divided by x. So what is that? Well, I could just subtract the powers, right? So I get 7 minus 1, and that's 6. Now, what if it was reversed? What if it was something like x to the power 1 divided by x to the power 7? Well, if you use negative powers, then you just subtract these two powers, right? So the 1 and 7, and that's just going to be negative 6. But again, they don't want you to leave the negative power in there. So it's going to say, okay, well, I don't want to see a negative, so move it to the bottom and becomes a positive. So that's going to be 1 over x to the 6.